During a recent interview, Professor James Small made some comments that infuriated Black Americans or foundational Black Americans. Some foundational Black Americans went far by questioning the lineage of Professor James Small. Was Professor James Small right or wrong for saying what he said? Please, share, like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you.
And yes, we were there before Columbus, but we were everywhere before Columbus. So why is it so important that we were in North America? We were in South America, we were in Brazil, we were in Cambodia, we were in China. And so what we're dealing with, you've always had those who was ashamed of being African. But it isn't just that. A part of it is a reaction between what we call the immigrant ideology versus an indigenous ideology. The Africans who have been in America for the last 500 years feel that the Africans who come to America in the last 5 years do not ally themselves with them, but ally themselves with our enemies. That's what's at the crux of this. All right? It isn't just the denial. And so, and it isn't that the Africans who are arriving lately is allying themselves with our enemies, because they don't perceive, just like we don't know our history in America. How do we expect a guy from Kenya or Nigeria to know the African-American history? We don't know the history. We are fighting the same enemies, no matter where we are in the world. They just have a different face on them, maybe a little different strategy. But the biggest thing they're trying to do is make sure to divide us in the West from you on the continent. So if you're going to look at that thing, it's not a rift between some black Americans and some Africans. That's the U.S. State Department. It may have started out with a few ignorant people, but they knew how to take advantage of that ignorance. But I don't even think it started out with a few ignorant people. I think they started it. They tested the water with that first group, that lawyer woman from California and the man, and then somehow they got to Tariq Nasheed. If you remember, Tariq Nasheed was going in just the opposite direction a few years ago. Why did that U-turn occur? Now, like I said,
I was surprised because I watched all the Hidden Colors. That's where I discovered you, from the Hidden Colors, and I'm like, how did you move from the Hidden Colors to this? Like, it doesn't, yeah.
Well, he may not be an agent. He just may be disgusted and tired of thinking that he's being taken advantage of by his brothers and sisters from the continent because of his own ignorance. Just like the brothers and sisters from the continent think they're being taken advantage of when they come over here by some of us. And that's from a lack of relationship. And I'm telling you that the State Department and the American Immigration Department is right at the center of that. Plaintiffs in that beginning, you're not going to do that.
Exactly.
You're going to reluctantly go along with that process. And then that process starts building. And then you got the African Americans who are just playing ignorance, but we don't know how much American State Department or Justice Department is involved in Foundation of Black America. Who's getting paid the money to say what they're saying?
Is Tariq Nasheed also going to call Professor James Small a musty African or a dirt cookies eater for saying these things about him and the foundational Black Americans? At this point, I can afford to buy a ticket to see the fight between Tariq Nasheed and James Small. Anyway, let me reiterate this thing I said many times on this channel. The majority of Black Africans support the delineation movement of Black Americans. We believe that the delineation is the easiest way Black Americans can assert their political power in the United States and eventually get reparations for slavery and free labor their grandparents were subject to. Like everybody, Black Americans also have the right to delineate from whomever they want and assert their cultural identity. Not only is the delineation important for Black Americans, but it is also necessary, because Black Americans will never get their political leverage without them delineating from immigrants in the United States. At his age, Professor James Small should know or understand better the legal quagmire the white establishment has imposed on the Black Americans in the United States. He should be the first to talk about the big threat immigrants represent to the survival of Black Americans or to encourage the delineation movement the grassroots of Black Americans have started. The fact that Professor James Small slammed the foundational Black American movement shows that he lacks honesty, objectivity, and foresight. I could not disagree more with what Professor James Small said about the ongoing delineation movement of Black Americans. Any black individual who is honest, objective, and foresight should know that black Americans cannot overcome the economic, social, and political hardships the white establishment have imposed on them unless they are able to choose and elect their own people for political offices. This is why the delineation movement is unavoidable for black Americans. Immigrants have not been useful but detrimental to black Americans. This is not a fiction but a fact, and I saw with my own eyes how the white establishments have elevated and chosen immigrants to represent or be the spokespersons for black Americans. Furthermore, Professor James Small seems like a self-centered individual who is devoid of collective interest mindset. I'm wondering if he is also one of these phony or so-called Pan-Africanists who are very loud but cannot show anything tangible they have accomplished for black people globally. Pan-Africanism, the real Pan-Africanism, was dead a long time ago. Even many black individuals in Africa realize this already, and therefore they have started to denounce the phony or the so-called Pan-Africanists on the African continent.
Le Cameroun qui fait la risée du monde entier, avec le plus vieux président, depuis 43 ans. Ce Cameroun regorge aussi de ceux qui prétendent être des panafricanistes.
Cameroon, which is a laughingstock around the world with the oldest president that has already ruled for 43 years, is also teeming with those who claim to be Pan-Africanists. These Pan-Africanists, who you often see on live streams on social media and on Afric Media, worry the Cameroonians and even people in other African countries. They defend their interests because they have cronies in tax havens. They are paid for it. Cameroonian and African Pan-Africanists are political businessmen and businesswomen. They don't care about their own countries and their own people's miseries. These pseudo-intellectuals and Pan-Africanists, who have triple citizenships, travel far and wide, tell us things that don't exist, have never ever been close to their people. They are always at the dining table or next the feeder.
Ces intellectuels de façade, ces panafricanistes, qui ont les triples nationalités, et qui voyagent à gauche et à droite, qui vont vous raconter des choses qui n'existent pas, n'ont jamais été à côté des peuples. Jamais. Ils sont toujours à côté de la mangeoire.
Any black person worldwide, who doesn't support the ongoing delineation movement of black Americans for fear of rendering Pan-Africanism worthless, is either a phony Pan-Africanist or a regular opportunist. As someone who used to live in the United States, I'm very aware of how both the Democratic and Republican parties have been strategically using immigrants to represent black Americans politically and then to undermine them. Immigrants are the main tools the white American establishment has been using for decades to undermine black Americans' interests. As far as Tariq Nasheed is concerned, I cannot comment on what Professor Small said about him being linked to CIA. Indeed, I don't have any concrete evidence about his tie to the CIA to show at this point. I consider Tariq Nasheed to be a great asset for black Americans. But his attitude or behavior, for a while, has been so childish and thuggish that many black people throughout the world lose admiration for him or no longer want to listen to him. Why can't Tariq Nasheed focus only on the black American delineation movement instead of constantly denigrating and verbally attacking all black Africans in Caribbean for no reasons or for an isolated incident? Things are not good right now for black people globally, because of unnecessary fights a faction of black Americans led by Tariq Nasheed has instigated between black Americans and blacks in Africa and the Caribbean. This unnecessary fight or clash Tariq Nasheed and his faction have started is very damaging to the collective image of black people globally. According to Tariq Nasheed himself, he has been denigrating black Africans and promoting the delineation of black Americans from black Africans because he heard on the social media an African or some African individuals calling black Africans Akata. It makes no sense at all that Tariq Nasheed has been constantly insulting and denigrating all black Africans over this isolated incident. It is a shame that Tariq Nasheed has been spreading anti-black African rhetoric to gather an audience and to make his money nowadays. There is in Africa a billion of blacks whose main concern is how to survive daily, and they don't even know anything about the United States. So, why do these blacks in Africa have to take the blame for what an isolated or a few African immigrants in the United States do against black Americans? Is Tariq Nasheed or the FBA faction going to tell us that black Americans never disrespected or undermined African immigrants in the United States? Having lived in the United States, I can say without hesitation that I had seen some black Americans disrespecting black immigrants from Africa and the Caribbean. I had also seen some black immigrants from Africa and the Caribbean disrespecting and undermining black Americans. While living in the United States, I had had a few bad experiences with my black American brothers and sisters, but I never used these bad experiences as a reason to harbor vitriol towards black Americans collectively. For instance, I was waiting for a bus to commute to work one day when a black American man with his girlfriend I never met before asked if I was also waiting for the bus. I said yes. The man then asked me if I'm from Africa. I said yes. And to my big surprise, this black American man shamelessly said this to me: "I don't know why you Africans still come to my country. I don't like to see you guys in my country because you soulless." His girlfriend started laughing after her boyfriend said this to me. Having noticed how ignorant this man and his girlfriend are, I didn't bother to respond to their comment in mockery that day. This is an example of verbal attacks and disrespect from black Americans black African immigrants experience or endure in the United States. Again, as African myself who had lived in the United States for more than 2 decades, I fully understand the delineation movement of black Americans, and it is long overdue. Also, I fully understand the grievance of black Americans against immigrants, especially against some black immigrants from Africa and the Caribbean who tend to disrespect and even undermine them. It is always very embarrassing and painful to some black individuals like me to see some black immigrants from Africa and the Caribbean disrespect or undermine black Americans in the United States. It is important that black Americans understand why some black immigrants from Africa and the Caribbean disrespect or undermine them in the United States. From my personal assessment, there are 2 things that explain why some black African immigrants in the United States disrespect or undermine black Americans. The first thing is the decline in the African culture that is no longer the moral compass for many African adults and children. The African culture has lost the notion of solidarity and collective interest, which are no longer taught at homes and schools. In the midst of this, European imperialists and others have found an opportunity to indoctrinate black Africans with their education and eventually prepare black African students for debauchery or worthless life. Because of this gap in the African culture, many Africans continue to embrace many bad habits that drive them to undermine the interests of their own kinds without remorse. In some African countries such as Somalia, Sudan, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Nigeria, Chad, Mali, Niger, Mauritania, or Senegal, the majority of their populations identify with Arabs instead of identifying with other black people in other African countries and at the diaspora. As African, I was not surprised at all when I heard Khalid Muhammad raise this issue in a YouTube video I came across a while ago. In that video, Khalid Muhammad said that he could not comprehend black Sudanese, to whom he talked to during his visit in Sudan, telling him that they are not African but Arab. While living in the United States, I myself came across some Somali, Eritreans, and Sudanese who told me that they are not technically African but Arab. This is the reality in Africa, and this is how backward the collective mindset of black Africans has been for a while. The second thing is the personality of some Africans, particularly some black immigrants who disrespect or undermine black Americans in the United States. Today many blacks in Africa and the Caribbean, on the individual level, are devoid of values like the Westerners or the imperialists. This explains the fact that some black immigrants in the United States keep joining hands with enemies to undermine their own kinds like black Americans. Furthermore, European imperialists have managed to create among Africans useless intellectuals, corrupted politicians, worthless leaders, and demons that have no shame undermining their own people, their own nations or countries. All these dysfunctions have become unfortunately the norms throughout the African and Caribbean nations. To many black individuals in these nations and many black immigrants in the United States, for instance, life has simply become gambling. I still remember listening to a Ghanaian who was popular in his country and who used to live in Nigeria also. While explaining to his audience why African leaders don't have visions and why some Africans behave the way they behave, he talked about how he saw with his own eyes the Igbo in Nigeria educate their youths by telling them that they have to get rich by all means. And this Ghanaian said this is why many Nigerians, especially the Igbo, behave the way they behave and don't give a damn about moralities or wrong versus right. In the same context, I came across on the social media, not long ago, a white man who was explaining how the Igbo in Nigeria literally sold their chief or king's throne to a white man in exchange for money. So, this is why some black immigrants in the United States or some black individuals in Africa and the Caribbean see nothing wrong with undermining their own kinds like black Americans. In summary, blacks in Africa and the Caribbean have no understanding whatsoever of solidarity, collective interest, or building the future. Besides, some black individuals such as the black African and Caribbean immigrant in the United States have shady personalities that explain their bad and weird behaviors towards black Americans. They only worry about what they can gain today, and they don't care at all about the consequences of their behaviors or actions in the long term. Unfortunately, there are many other black individuals with such bad or weird behavior throughout the African continent. Tariq Nasheed and FBA should tone down their anti-black African rhetoric and solely focus on the delineation movement. I would have no problem with their anti-black African rhetoric if Tariq Nasheed and FBA have been denigrating and harboring vitriol only towards the African immigrant individuals who disrespect and undermine black Americans. I don't understand why Tariq Nasheed and FBA think it is okay to constantly denigrate and verbally attack all black Africans and all black in the Caribbean for the behavior of some African and Caribbean immigrants. Black Americans and blacks in Africa and Caribbean need at this point to come together and find a common ground to understand each other. It is high time Tariq Nasheed and his FBA faction stopped denigrating and verbally attacking all black Africans and Caribbean who bear no responsibilities for what some grown black immigrants do against black Americans in the United States. It is not Tariq Nasheed or FBA's job to force blacks in Africa and the Caribbean to change their mindset by denigrating and verbally attacking them daily. However, black Africans collectively have to change their mindset that has been very detrimental to the well-being and progress of black Africans and the all-black people worldwide. For the advancement and betterment of black people individually and collectively, black Africans must change their backward mindset. It will be a utopia if I say that black Americans are flawless in everything. The collective mindset of is far from being perfect. So, there are flaws that have to be corrected, and there are things that have to be changed about the collective mindset of black Americans also.
And yes, we were there before Columbus, but we were everywhere before Columbus. So why is it so important that we were in North America? We were in South America, we were in Brazil, we were in Cambodia, we were in China. And so what we're dealing with, you've always had those who was ashamed of being African. But it isn't just that. A part of it is a reaction between what we call the immigrant ideology versus an indigenous ideology. The Africans who have been in America for the last 500 years feel that the Africans who come to America in the last 5 years do not ally themselves with them, but ally themselves with our enemies. That's what's at the crux of this. All right? It isn't just the denial. And so, and it isn't that the Africans who are arriving lately is allying themselves with our enemies, because they don't perceive, just like we don't know our history in America. How do we expect a guy from Kenya or Nigeria to know the African American history? We don't know the history, and you are against me. That's a big part of what's going on. That's not true across the board, because many of the brothers and sisters who are Muslim have been able to blend very well with the African Americans who are Muslims. But the African Americans and many of the brothers on the continent who's from the Christian community have not been able to blend very well. And that's the majority community. If you're going to give these people vending license, then give our people vending license. So you stop arresting them. And then the other thing with the brothers from the continent, brothers from here, that if you don't work together, they're going to play you against one another. And none of you are going to really make a living. So that was my argument on the street. But I have a deeper understanding of it, and I can make the argument. But most people have a trivial knowledge of anything. They just said, oh, he did this, or oh, he did that, and oh, they don't like me. And I go, that's the craziest thing in the world to me, and maybe to you. But to them, when you're ignorant of history and college, and you've never traveled, that thing is a big thing in your mind. So that's why we've got to talk about it and say, no. We know this conflict is a part of I used to call it post-slavery trauma syndrome. Even before my sister Joy wrote her book by decades, I've got lectures on post-slavery trauma syndrome. And I coined the term, actually, decades before. But Dr. Degree has done such an excellent job. I spoke with her about a month ago on the document that she has written, that the whole world needs to write it. Because you can just change slavery to colonialism and you'd have the same result. you know. And the white man don't give a damn about none of us. He only wants the raw material of Africa, and he wants our labor and don't want to pay us for it here in America. So it's for us to try to have more interaction like you and I are having today, and I have sometimes with Susan Tato on Pan-African Daily TV and some of the other forums, and as they can talk up their side, the foundation, then let's talk up our Pan-Africanism. Let's not let them define Pan-Africanism. Let us define Pan-Africanism, and we should do this here today, getting those things accomplished, supplying those needs. So,
wow.
Africans want to be free.
Thank you.
You know. But I'm glad to come and hang out with you for a minute, and we get to know each other. But we always knew each other.
Yeah.
We're Africans. We're fighting the same enemies, no matter where we are in the world. They just have a different face on them, maybe a little different strategy. But the biggest thing they're trying to do is make sure to divide us in the West from you on the continent. So if you're going to look at that thing, it's not a rift between some black Americans and some Africans. That's the U.S. State Department. It may have started out with a few ignorant people, but they knew how to take advantage of that ignorance. But I don't even think it started out with a few ignorant people. I think they started it. They tested the water with that first group, that lawyer woman from California and the man, and then somehow they got to Tariq Nasheed. If you remember, Tariq Nasheed was going in just the opposite direction a few years ago. Why did that U-turn occur? Now, like I said,
I was surprised because I watched all the Hidden Colors. That's where I discovered you, from the Hidden Colors, and I'm like, how did you move from the Hidden Colors to this? Like, it doesn't, yeah.
Well, he may not be an agent. He just may be disgusted and tired of thinking that he's being taken advantage of by his brothers and sisters from the continent because of his own ignorance. Just like the brothers and sisters from the continent think they're being taken advantage of when they come over here by some of us. And that's from a lack of relationship. And I'm telling you that the State Department and the American Immigration Department is right at the center of that. And so this bitterness has a lot of little things that grow them. Our people don't want to be caught in that situation, but if the State Department is telling you that, and you're trying to get your green card and a citizenship and a job or enter college, what are you going to do? Are you going to say, I'm not listening to y'all, and be thrown back on a plane and sent back to Guinea? You're not going to do that.
Exactly.
You're going to reluctantly go along with that process. And then that process starts building. And then you got the African Americans who just play in ignorance, but we don't know how much American State Department or Justice Department is involved in Foundation of Black America. Who's getting paid the money to say what they're saying? There's a paper, it's a white paper, you could probably find it online. It was done by a man named Brzezinu Brzezinski. He was the national security director under Jimmy Carter. And his white paper, the first paragraph, he said that the policy of the United States of America, that African American and Africans should never unite politically, culturally, or economically. That is still the policy of the government of the United States. So what you're seeing ain't quite what you see, and there's only a piece of what you see. You understand what I'm telling you?
I do.
So once you get clear on these things, that's why studying history is important. You'll see how Fred Hampton was killed. You'll see how Malcolm X was killed. They were both surrounded by agents and collaborators that looked just like us. So you can bet some of the foundational Black American people are agents, and even some from the African sides are agents. I've seen my brothers and sisters from the continent be recruited by the State Department. And I tried to pull the coattail of their parents. But if your son is being brought to America, given a free education, who's going to listen to me? The people would have to make the choice who they want as their president. But we have to understand how colonialism works, how neocolonialism works. And reading Kwame Nkrumah's book, Neocolonialism, is one of the best books you can get on the subject. That'll explain this foundational Black American thing and all that. Because you'll see what the strategy is. once you know what the strategy is and what the goal is, you'll recognize the tools when you see them at play. You know, you'll recognize the tool.
Mm-hmm.
So,
wow.
But we're going to talk about our love for one another, no matter what part of the world we're in, whether we're in Cambodia. I get calls from African brothers from the continent who live in Thailand, who live in Dubai. They listen to my tapes, and they call me all the time. And I give them, so wherever we are in the world, we're Africans. I think that's Peter Tosh. You know, when we listen to Peter, you know, listen to the records of Peter Tosh, Peter tell you that we are an African. You know.
I love it. Yeah.
Right.
By the way, Prof.
You know. So we just have to tell our side. Let's let the Foundation Black America do their talk, but let's talk about our history. Let's talk about Nkrumah. Let's talk about Du Bois. Let's talk about Paul Robeson. Let's talk about Nani. Let's talk about Nzinga. Let's talk about what's happening now. Let's talk about all of the young African Americans that have moved to Ghana, Kenya, and Nigeria. Let's talk about all the Kenyan and the Nigerian Tanzanian who lives now in North America, who's not involved in any of this foolishness. But they're married into each other. They're raising their children, sending them to college. They're coming back and forth home, visiting their families. Let us tell our story.